I guess at this point I'm really avoiding the deep dive video of Bell, but you have to understand, while I'm hard at work with how to be an adventurer, I kinda have been put off by making a Danmachi video just to save me some pain. So let's talk about my greatest pains in anime as a general overview as to why over the years I think the idea of Isekai has gotten so bland and pathetic. I've almost tempted to isekai myself into a world of terrible turmoil, a chance to avoid living a capitalistic life, and me also having to struggle with an almighty god that lives in a giant server that seemingly dislikes me talking about negative stuff, but also loves me talking about negative topics. Over the years, I have grown quite skeptical of the isekai genre, not just because of how lazy it's gotten, but because of how it stifles creativity. I'm also sure that I've heard some of my contemporaries and even a few videos of mine in the past about how I'm beginning to dislike Isekai because of how set in the narrative it is. It's nothing new. I've seen plenty of other anti-tubers talk about it in length about how each one having its own stories is still an Isekai. I mean, for fuck's sake, it's happening in both movies like the Monster Hunter film and video games like Pokemon Arceus? Really, Nintendo? Do you really feel like scraping the bottom of that barrel? 25 plus years and the best storyline is Pokemon the game, but what if we made it about sports with this asshole plastering every sponsor he can on his shapely ass, or Pokemon the game, but shoot them back a few centuries and make them super duper extra special? Pokemon hasn't been all that bombastic since 4th generation, and I stand by that narrative. Anyways, I think the main point of why Isekai is so easy on the eyes for so many people is because of how it's a jack of all trades but master of none. And one could argue that a master of none is better than a master of one. That fits well when it comes to a YouTube content creator who has to do everything themselves unless you're a huge channel with multiple editors and a talented team to take them further than before, but in a sense of story, that leaves a lot to be desired. My own life in many ways, but at least I have a corgi to keep me company. Isekais do not keep me company. They are a functional chore, because the main drawing point of an isekai is just how relatable the protagonist is. How little their personalities make all the Japanese boys and preteens squee in specific. And that's just kind of the audience that does like isekai, young adults. But that raises a lot of issues because of how certain narratives are placed. When I said I am beginning to dislike isekai because of how set in the narrative it is, I am right. There's a core narrative points that make an isekai an isekai. Someone has to die for there to be an isekai in most situations. Either it's second-degree vehicular manslaughter or an act from fucking God themselves. A rare few exceptions, or the rare few that I can bear to watch, but because of how popular this genre it is, makes me skeptical of how far this kind of narrative can go before it finally loses steam. And to be honest, when that bubble bursts, you're gonna really be disappointed of how little it contributed to actual storytelling itself, or you're really gonna hate that waifu you dropped a lot of money on for a figure because the studio producing it is not gonna make a new season just because of how little it mattered on its time slot. Here's where I feel like you can predict Isekai as a genre. Step 1, someone most likely is gonna die. This doesn't have to happen all that often. Shield Hero is an example. Just turns out the manga and the light novel section has a magic book, and this is often the other in the section of somewhat bearable anime to watch. Next, a person finds themselves being granted power of some kind that sets them apart from the rest of the world's society. This power, in a lot of ways, is overpowered. So much so, if you stuck it in a plug, it could solve the world's energy crisis. Subaru from ReZero's Return by Death, Toya in Another World with My Smartphone, gift from God himself, an iPhone that seemingly doesn't need updates anymore. Azusa from I've been killing slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level, also a gift from God, not to mention these fucking titles of dead giveaways. If you can't keep it in one breath, I'm gonna start isekaiing some publishers. And these titles are in between having little to no conflict and torture porn. I'm okay with these titles having conflict and tragedy and how that can make characters care and grow, but I'm not holding my breath because these stories can come off as childish enough to believe in the power of friendship, and where the hell is your friends now? Conflict comes down to how well you can overcome it. And these stories want to write it so bad, but when it comes to the details of how to is why I have the feeling I do. If you can fix something quickly, that is just lazy writing. Killing slimes for 300 years is my prime example. If you want to write a story about an easygoing life that can be in a fantasy world, why not just write that? Why are you going out of your way to create conflict that will be settled in minutes, and everyone's all hunky-dory afterwards? This is the same issue with the cell phone one too. Had story beats, but not enough time to tell them. The conflict is there, but which of the girls gets to bang the protagonist first? Conflict is nothing you can turn a few pages to the end and know exactly how it happened. It's not creative. It's not telling us anything that we haven't heard before. Using that, I want to point out that good story writing does exist. I recently rewatched Ancient Magus Bride. The setup has conflicts in it, a driving force that makes the story have a good through line of how it uses that conflict to do so in its own world building. Ups, downs, good times, bad times, stress, relaxation, consequences to actions, and rewards for payoffs in a story where magic is very real because of how much it can twist our realities. The goal of the story is to figure out how to keep Chase alive, and the results are bittersweet, but still a great ending all the same. Because not every story is a perfect happy ending. But Yarrow, you said that you hated some of these shows that are basically torture porn. Yes, I did say that. I also said conflict comes down to how well you can overcome it, you fucking Neanderthal. If there's no consequences to actions, then how am I going to enjoy how immersive that story is? Because if you could just break all the rules no matter how many are set before you, then I could just say I'm Jeff Bezos and never work another day in my life. There is a difference between conflict and borderline sociopathy. That is the difference between a good story writing and how many times you can stab a horse for more money. I'm tentative to say this, but Overlord does this quite a bit. And ReZero. I'm not in a long shot to say that these stories are bad, but I'm also not in a point-blank range to say that these stories are good either. Overlord does a lot of prancing around to make sure it seems like we are going to care about all these characters all the time. And then several episodes later, kill them to get a reaction. Oh yes, they are so very important. So important, in fact, that we see them for a few episodes. And then they die. At what point do these characters set the standard for Ainz to have emotional challenges? Because he went after Clementine to seek revenge. Yeah, that was a fun little squash fight, but almost every fight that wasn't Shaltir was a squash fight. Feels like there's a lot of padding and not enough world domination being the goal of this series. So I ask you, how were these people and the results of Ainz killing Clementine contributing to that? The mystery of Shaltir's turn was more impressive. But we didn't have time for that. We gotta make sure Ainz is away long enough dealing with the matters that I would consider below his list of important shit to do. But if he is away long enough, then we get more pages to read instead of him just being there and the book closes. It's not about knowing that the villain will win. It's how they win. Faffing about isn't what I would be spending my time writing a storyline that is purely diverting away for pure fan service. It's not what I signed up for. Still a great story though, but it's beats like that can turn into a mumble rap album. Speaking of... On the odd end of a story that cannot seemingly course correct is ReZero. Because this story that seemingly loves to faff about, because there's a lot of spunk and weak old underwear here that I cannot fucking care less for, every bad end of this story does not matter. It's one step closer to reaching a goal, but two stabs in the back in writing. Because every action has to have a meticulous points of reaction, and if you're so much of a centimeter out of place, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own... Oh, wait, I'm back at the start. Let's try again, shall we? But don't forget, it's also gotta be very emotional, and hard, and painful, and can I please get a fucking Oscar nomination? Anybody! From my point of view, this can be a very interesting way of doing story writing when it comes to the idea of time travel, or even a form of divination. Erased being the best series I can say that does this well enough that I can even remember Erased without needing a wiki. But this is the horse and here is the knife. Now stab it and don't stop until you're also isekai'd. Because spending a lot of time on a single story beat over and over again can get very tiring. Yes, the results are there with each new piece of information, but they can easily be compiled on YouTube and then skip to the end where it's the one we can carry on with the rest of the story. Because at a certain point, there are branching timelines that just get clipped and all that buildup in relationships stop mattering because they can lead to a bad end, and we are at the start again. Watching this kid cry every episode and then come up with a new idea because he cried is not entertaining. It's a chore. But why do we love it? Because we all want the best wife and had the good ending. Good! ReZero does a lot of good build-up, but if your payoff is how much closer Subaru gets pussy, I feel like there's a strange disconnect for ReZero's goal and how many more times Nagatsuki can fill the pages for how far he can get his protagonist's head to be shoved up his ass, preferably as literally as possible, before realizing that it's holding back the story. You're being uncharacteristically critical of these highly acclaimed shows. To that I say, no, I'm not. Because honestly, these shows, these forms of storytelling, can be very good. And I see that even some of the best have a few of their own problems. It's just the nature of how the writing comes off as unbearable. Think of every great, highly acclaimed show in the past 10 years. Not all of them are perfect, or at least they have a through line to get closer to a goal in a creative way. How is that these grand worlds where I'm supposed to be in awe of take some other asshole from our own world to set the story? I understand the appeal of the fish out of water narrative, how well it can make us connect with a character that equally does not know what is going on as the rest of us, but that in its own way can come off as being a lazy story writer. Showing and not telling, writing details and building the world, as it is seen through the eyes of someone who cares, is more imperative to the comparison of someone who does not give a single iota of a shit to someone who will get their head cut off, shit down their throat, then forced to eat said shit through a rotting head. You have this amazing world with tons of amazing characters who have a lot more to lose, whose problems cannot be easily solved, whose conflict could matter in the grand scheme of things, whose entire life will begin and will end in this world. And the best you can do is some fucking asshole who died and got lucky enough to try again? You could cut out the first part of every Isekai and you would have an improved story, because then the work would be worth the effort. And if not, then I guess it's not worth the watch. What makes this worse is that Isekai has stagnated the fantasy genre because of how easy it can be to write a world full of magic and mystery. Dungeons and Dragons is more often than not a fantasy setting that is extremely popular. But if you're like me as a DM, you run a homebrew world where you have to use your own world building techniques as well as a functional system in the 5th edition to make that world. It's controlled by said DM. But animes, mangas, light novels run the risk of being compared or disenfranchised to their contemporaries, and that bothers me to my core. There is one set that will work for Isekai, and that is fantasy. Because it sells, and it sells a lot. But that does not always mean it's good. Harsh my criticism may be, there is more value in so many other stories that care to show you its world than tell you how exceptional it is. Because that's the thing, right? You see through the eyes of people who already care. Attack on Titan, One Piece, Naruto, Danmachi, Demon Slayer, Goblin Slayer, JoJo's, Ancient Magus Bride, Full Metal Alchemist, fucking Fairy Tail. You don't need an asshole from another world where there's plenty of these that will do. So confident in making amazing worlds and characters, too much of a coward to actually use them to your advantage. Horse, knife, stab, money. That's the big takeaway here. I know these writers, these authors are doing their best to want to create a world that they see in their minds. But I feel like they're also doing so with their hand tied, twisted, then sprained in order to get these stories out. Or they are too afraid that they won't get published and don't get to eat. Striking a middle ground between creative and sellable is a hard task when it comes to making sure that you get your due. It's a dancing act. There's also more risks than rewards. And more often than not, plenty of these stories can get very well written, and some of these are their first strike at success within the industry. But given the nature of Japanese animation production culture having its own problems, publishers I could compare a lot of problems to the tune of the Steam Greenlight feature. Just nothing but sloths of poorly made games and asset bundles, but every once in a lunar eclipse is a game that the magical Steam wizards have now presented to the internet. Now with more videos of local anime girls playing for funsies. Over the years, I have heard a lot of bitching about how certain animes, mostly shonen, has gotten so popular. Well, I'm sorry, but you can only get I got teleported to another world after sniffing my mom's feet so many times before people with some semblance of a brain cell can see that there's just more to life than being horny. I'm not even going to get into the conversation about fan service at this point because I'm not fucking psychotic. I recently had a conversation about how I feel like I'm watching less and less anime over the years with a friend of mine, and they simply noted that there's just more quality content coming out nowadays, and I cannot disagree with them. Shows like Peacemaker, for example, really pushed the boundary in its own way. The Mandalorian is a whole lot of fun. The Witcher on Netflix has far more world building. My Hero Academia, Demon Slayer, hell, even My Dress Up Darling pushes its own stories to new heights. I've exchanged quantity with quality. 10 years ago, I would be lucky to find an anime series that was dropped on the internet. But now we finally have a place for it all on these streaming sites. It's easier to curate a better experience than hooty har har anime titty go boy yo 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 yo. So yeah, what can I conclusively say about this whole thing? I'm prone to find that Isekai series are not all bad, but not all that glitters is gold. You want to write a fantasy story, maybe focus on the world itself and stop having an excuse to give us a padded reason to care about this world. Or hell, for fuck's sake, take my advice and throw the whole fantasy thing out the door and try a new genre. I'm sure there's a few out there that could use a right kicking in the balls too. On the odd end, this is a difference between confidence and cowardice. If you have to explain why your world is special instead of showing why the world is special, then it runs the risk of the nerd that got a multi-million-dollar job and the high school burnout that didn't make it to the NFL. And lastly, this is why quality over quantity is more important. Back in the day, I used to have 2 to 3 shows I watched every day. Now I have 5 shows a week. I'm a much happier man for it. Unless somehow I end up watching an anime that can get really weird but really good really fast. Shit. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. Sorry if this video seemed kind of like a downer. Not exactly my intention, but the main point of this was that I wanted to finally express where my mind is, especially when it comes to isekai videos. And also I hope you kind of like the slight change of what I've done with these videos. Let me know in the comments down below, or just, you know, dislike the video. I'll definitely know. Also, we have merch. Got some brand new merch, and also, I might be coming out with another one of these videos shortly after the summer is coming to a close, considering that spicy anime reviews will be coming out soon. So, yeah, I hope you like the video. And that's about it. Bye.